Welcome back to the Trending Communicator. I'm your host, Dan Nestle. I've always believed in research. Done right, it's the difference between a comms program built on insight and one built on vibes. And the best work I've seen started with a real question and someone willing to chase the answer. Because we are, at heart, inquisitive people in the comms profession. But what's always bugged me is the counterfeit version. The survey reverse engineered to confirm whatever you'd already decided to say, usually in service of a lead generation campaign or something like this. It's very, very early content marketing-y. You whip up a LinkedIn poll on the back of a napkin, or worse, you have AI do it now. You call it science, and you give honest research a bad name that it never earned. And for a long time, the real research stayed rare because rigorous research was slow and expensive. So what happens now that the cost of doing it right is collapsing? Now that a comms person or a marketer can interrogate the entire record of what got said, where, and to whom, instead of working from a hand-picked sample. Well, today's guest did exactly that. He ran over 1,000 podcast episodes through AI to map which shows are truly built for private companies and their founders and which only claim to be. It's the fourth report in a research discipline he built from nothing at his agency, nominated for 2 Sabre Awards. All from a 20-year agency lifer who decided to answer his biggest questions by writing the code himself. Now, this is the same guy who taught Nintendo how to tweet, who cut the ribbon on a Disney World attraction and tracked down the world's biggest Guinness fans for the brand's 250th birthday. Consumer PR royalty, who quietly became one of the sharpest AI and comms minds in the business. Well, we're going to get into what his podcast research found, some other research programs he's done, and where it all points. What our profession becomes when curiosity finally has tools fast enough to keep up with it. He's head of communications innovation at Brands to Life, advisor to Princeton startup founders, Detroit native, 2-time girl dad, and a proud nerd who might just have turned PR research into something that earns the name. Please welcome to the show my friend, Rich Gallagher, and also my local buddy, because we're both in the Princeton area. How are you doing, man? It's good to see you.
I am good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's funny, like going through all that intro stuff.
That is quite an intro. Yeah.
You earned it. You've got a couple of scalps under your belt, so to speak. I mean, in the PR world, but I can't help but just notice, of course, that there's so many similarities here. We're approximately, in a similar age group. I'm two-time over girl dad. I'm a huge nerd. Mm-hmm. I am coding my life away these days. If I couldn't find the tool or if I can't figure it out, I just code it and build it. And research is one of those things that, like I said, I always valued it and always found it so critically important. But how often have we gotten it right? Or how often has it been kind of put aside because it's too expensive or we take a shortcut, and I think you've taken a very different approach, So let's hear about it. Who is Rich Gallagher? Where are you coming from? What's going on at Brands to Life? You pick and choose,
absolutely. And I think you hit it on the head where, I think PR and marketing folks have for the longest time really kind of looked at research as sort of a means to an end, right? Of, we've got this campaign. I really need to prove, this many people like this thing and it happens to be the thing our client is promoting. Right? I mean, we've all been there. But, I was fortunate enough, kind of early-ish in my career, back when I was at Conan Wolf, and this was, early 2000s, and we had launched the ADP National Employment Report, with, obviously at this point, ADP was paying 1 in 6 people in the country. And, they were sitting on this massive trove of data just in looking at, well, how many new paychecks did we cut this month versus last month? Mm-hmm. And then just even a little bit of, just going one layer deeper in, well, what sectors were those new payrolls in? And that became this, incredible kind of econometric bellwether, and it really cost ADP pretty much nothing. Mm-hmm. It was already data they had, and was very easy to with the help of some economists, turn that into something that, I mean, look, it comes out now first Wednesday of the month, and you get everyone watching it to kind of predict what the Bureau of Labor Statistics report is going to be like. So that was, I think, really powerful to see firsthand. And then years and years later, I ended up working with Moat. Moat does advertising analytics people. This is well before, they were still a pretty small company before they had sold to Oracle and all of that. And they had this gadget that they built, and it was basically a Chrome extension that would show, just drawing on publicly available data, how much each political party had spent on ads on the site you were looking at. And this was in the run up to the 2016 election, when it was, a massive story of, when we were really just starting to scratch the surface on, things like editorial bias and how kind of ad dollars might have wagged the dog on that. And that was, again, a really great learning for me. And oh wow, there's all this data already sitting out there. And in this case, it was publicly available, like Freedom of Information Act numbers that are sitting there that Moat pulled into this really cool gadget. And we worked with a lot of advertising reporters and political reporters to kind of plug them into this really ongoing story that they could use just to file piece after piece all throughout that election run up. And so it was neat seeing that, and then kind of tucking it away, because like you said, that level of rigorous research was kind of only available to academics, right? Like,
yeah.
No one on the client side or the agency side had the time to really do research the right way. Yeah. Then fast forward to a couple of years ago, we all get these fantastic research assistants. So our research department is largely Claude based here. And it's so I think it really starts with that question of like, okay, well, what's something that we up until a few years ago we never could do. And that was where we've now done a series of 4 reports, and they kind of each started with this sort of almost sounds like a dare, could you watch every single hour of market day television on the 3 major business broadcast networks for a month? Like, no, of course not, right? You wouldn't, that's like a Geneva Convention violation to force someone to do that. But now we have tools, you can scrape the closed caption for the hearing impaired and effectively make the AI watch the show. And when you start ingesting that amount of, when you're watching a full month of TV, or in the case of, almost 2,000 episodes of podcasts, you start to see these really interesting patterns emerge that you would never get just in your perspective as, I'm a fan that listens to the same handful of podcasts every week. It's like, yeah, you start to get a sense for the rhythm of your podcast, but you're not really gonna be able to appreciate kind of the full forest of, what's happening in podcast.
Well, it's a matter of like volume of all this unstructured data. That's kind of structured because it's sitting in specific places, but like, you're right. Years ago, I mean, 2016, you're talking about the run up to the election. Then we thought that, oh my gosh, look at all this great data you can pull. But then what do you do with it? How do you analyze it? Because, there's only so many Excel formulas that communicators know. The answer, by the way, is 0. We don't know any.
Right. Yeah.
Any Excel formulas. But there's, okay, we run it through this, or you try this, or, oh, what if we do a social listening thing? But like, the tools just weren't there. We had to invent, I was at Edelman at the time, around that time, a little before that. And the stuff that we were trying to do, myself and my boss, Dave Rosen, and David is just, I'm going to just say this, a genius, like analytics and measurement. Do you know David? He's
friend of the pod. I worked with David in my very first job in PR. I was 21 years old working with David in a firm that specialized in hedge funds. I think there were 4 of us working there at the time. Yeah. So we go way back.
Yeah. So David, he is a mad genius, and we were trying to figure out how to do this crazy thing called predictive analytics. right? Predictive analytics, taking recent but historical, because it's obviously if it's not right in the now, it's historical, but recent but historical content. It's really, really specialized from specialized places, analyzing it and then using that plus layered over user trends on certain websites and social. Just layer it all together, and then you go, I think that they're going to start talking about bonds again, this kind of thing. So like you come up with these lists, but to do that meant you had to read hundreds of articles or at least scan them. And you had to like then physically say, oh, I think that this article is about this, and write down the one blurb, right? The topic. And, you're just doing this. So it took me, I did one assignment, like one of the kind of prototypes that we did, took me like 60 something hours of man hours, but I had other people working on it too. So like all in, it was like 100 hours, 150 hours, crazy stuff. Today, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Like
absolutely.
30, I mean, like it takes me 30 seconds, then I wait 5 minutes, and then I get a much better, beautiful report done that tells me the same exact thing. And, that's just the difference. And so we had all this data, and just only limited by, the time that we had to sit there and crush it and analyze it, unless you're David Rosen, in which case you could read 400 articles in an afternoon, right? Because he's, like I said, mad genius. Sorry, David. It's true. But in your case, right, you had this kind of insight that some of us have had in different ways, because suddenly the AI is available and you could go, oh, wait, what can I do with this? But you had this insight and you decided to operationalize it. You took it and you decided to bring it into your firm. And kind of, I don't know if you were stepping on any toes with the big guys there, like the big guys meaning like the Ipsoses of the world or whatever, right. And or any existing relationships. But how did you manage to sell it in, and how did you know it was the real thing? How did you kind of figure out that the stuff I'm getting from AI is legit? And where did you and the last part of that is, how did you ensure it was?
Yeah. And I think that's a great question, is like, where does it start? I will say, I think the, agencies and comms departments kind of all over just have a tremendous opportunity right now, but the ones that are going to do the most with it, out of the gate are, the ones where leadership is bought in and can kind of turn on it fast enough. Like I'm proud of it at Brands to Life. We, very quickly launched the Brands to Life AI Hub, of which, I'm one of the members of in the US. But more importantly, I think we were very quick to put a policy together and kind of establish the sort of the rules of engagement with AI. Because, we're seeing even in kind of these early years, if your workplace is not allowing it, then you get a lot of this shadow AI use, to call it, right? Where, I think, your desk workers are going to use it, like, knowledge workers are going to use AI, period. And they should right now, right? It's, why would you not want to do your job more efficiently? But it's, the companies that are too slow to act on it and teach their people how we use this and what the regs are, they are really going to risk a lot of knowledge leakage and just stuff you don't want getting out of the four walls of your company getting out there. So I think that was the first thing, is from day one when I started doing this research, we already had a policy in place that I knew I was going to be working within the confines of, and knowing that I wasn't doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
And then I think, then to your question about like, well, how do we know it was legit? You really just had to start playing, right? I mean, I think, at first it was like, well, let's take a look at, can I get a hold of, I think the first one we did was actually just looking at, kind of traditional media. So New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, because at the time, we work with a lot of privately held, like PE and VC backed technology companies. And as leaders usually think, well, why aren't we in the Wall Street Journal? And so it was really looking at, well, let's quantify how many privately held CEOs are actually in the Wall Street Journal, in a given quarter. And so that became, okay, let's just, create something that can scrape these three newspapers, which sounded like a very simple thing at first, but then you realize, as I'm sure you've seen, like, once you get a little bit deep, it's like, oh, well, these three websites have three very different paywall structures and different sitemaps. And so it wasn't,
not
I'm not going to make one automation that crawls all three of them. I'm going to make three automations, and each one's designed to, read very specific content on a site.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you have to make sure it actually reads it, because, AI says, or you think that it's reading something.
You to read it. Yeah.
Right. But it reads the first three lines and the last in the middle and kind of says, okay, this is what this is about. But, you have to tell it to read the whole thing. Yeah.
And actually what the kind of first test for that was, I was inspired by, the New York Times sends out this email every week that basically says, like, how closely did you read the news this week? And so I every time it would ingest a few hundred articles, I would just sort of ask general questions about that period in time and say, who's in the news that you've read, and why are they interesting? And it was always able to come back with like very, kind of $100 Jeopardy level questions. I'm like, okay, you're like, it really is ingesting the stuff. And, had to come up with some workarounds where, if how is it getting articles? How is it, how can we structure the automation in a way that gives me time to, use actual login credentials, because of course through Brands to Life, we have memberships to all the papers we're looking at. And then in turn, when we went to do the broadcast one, then it was like, okay, YouTube TV is a great use case for this. Because that is a way to have, bring all of these three networks into a computer, into, and in with closed caption for the hearing impaired that it can scrape and all those things. And then again, like podcast was interesting because that still feels kind of like the Wild West of like, there are so many different solutions for how podcast captions get generated, that there was a lot of trial and error of just trying to, figure out an automation that actually could reliably, get the podcasts that we needed it to listen to.
Yeah. I've tried all sorts of scrapers, and I don't mean like the shady ones. I mean, all sorts of ways to scrape transcripts, content, like words, as it were, from whatever source it was, in a way that doesn't violate anybody's terms of service. That's hard. That's the hard part. I at some point, I settled on either. It depends on the source, but either dropping it into Notebook LM, which, especially if it's a YouTube video or something, it'll grab the entire transcript from YouTube video, but it's not structured. It's just like one continuous, line. So that was one method, and I was like, not sure if this is going to be great. Or I just take them and I drop them into Fred Fireflies, just to see how that's going. There's different ones you trust, different ones you don't. But there's no like one answer until you finally kind of can work out either a script or an automation or or build something for yourself that's going to go and get transcripts. It's going to go and get those things. And nowadays, of course, if you have Claude or even ChatGPT in the browser, you just open up a page and you're like, grab the text for me. Yeah. Which is kind of fun.
I think the most fun part of it right now is there is no one right way to do any of this.
Yeah.
And just how far it's come, right? Like, I think when we did the first two reports, that was during we had Claude Code, but not Cowork didn't come out yet. And I can't even imagine doing the podcast one before Cowork had come out. Cause like I am not a coder. So like me working with Claude Code very much felt like just trying to put IKEA furniture together where it's like, okay, tell me
you
what
were
to
working
do.
in the terminal.
Yeah, I'm going into terminal and now, okay, it gave me this error. What do I do with that? Just kind of that back and forth. So yeah, Cowork really like set me free.
It changed the game. Well, it's
totally
interesting. Like you're not going to find a bigger fan of Cowork, or maybe I'll fight you for that, like than me. And
no, I don't know. We've had this conversation before.
We've had this conversation.
This is my buddy.
Cowork's my bud. I mean, except for, like today and seems like every other week, there's some sort of anthropic problem with the status down. Can't do my work. You're supposed to be my friend, Claude. But with Cowork, I find it to be a indispensable now kind of part of multiple workflows that I have. But I still don't use it for the coding, right? I sometimes use it for speccing things out and a little bit of planning. But I never use Claude. I never use Cowork. I never use Cowork for code. I always use Claude Code for code. But recently, I've decided that as sort of proud I felt of myself for starting to be able to navigate the terminal window. And for those of you listening, the terminal window, and you don't know what that is, the command prompt in Windows is just like if you ever took a computer class, if you're of our age and you took a computer class in the 1980s, or right. that's what the terminal is like, just a little cursor blinking, and you have to actually type things out, and you can't like move that you can't
no mouse,
move to where you want to move to.
Right.
It's very very old school, but like people who love it. I mean,
it's a good way to take your very modern silicone that's sitting on your desk now and make it feel like what you used to launch Oregon Trail when you were in high school.
That's right. That's exactly right. But then, like with Claude for desktop, you've got now, Cowork, and you have Claude Code in the desktop version as well. And at first it was a little buggy, so I didn't use it. But now I find myself using that desktop version of Claude Code all the time. And it's great because then I can go back and chat about things, or I can, open up multiple sessions and continue in different places. It's a little bit better for me. But all that said, right? Like not having that, like I figure if you had the capability to do these massive research projects even before Cowork, and you did, right? Cowork just but Cowork just changed the game a little by being able to handle so many things all at once, and you being able to say, I'm just going to hit go and put you on auto, and I'm going to do other work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Cowork, like I said, I don't know if we even could have really done the podcast report, or the indie journalist report, the one I did about kind of Substack and Beehive and sort of that movement.
Yeah.
You really needed Cowork because it was that it's so good at assigning subagents kind of automatically. Because when we were running down, we had 96 podcasts that we were looking at, and we wanted to look at at least the last 12 shows of all of them, and so it really helped to have. Anytime there's a rotating cast of usually as many as 30 subagents working on this sometimes that would just be running down, and then they I think the brilliance of subagents is then they're not losing their place, and you don't have to, reprompt them ever. It's just sort of like, okay, I'm going to run this, this subagent is going to listen to all of this show, walk it all the way back, and then start on another one. So that kind of, that orchestration layer, I really think it would have been really, really hard to do without. I don't know if we could have. Like, I think then you're talking about, now you're back to academia and just needing to invest a lot of time and bring in human research.
It would take a lot more time, but you could still get there. Just you'd have to be a little inventive about how you're pulling the transcripts or something, or and worry about consistency all the time and whatnot. So taking the worry out of that's great, but. Tell you what I really appreciate about Cowork and Claude in general these days is the deep research part of this, right? So you're talking about these subagents and agents, subagents. Like for people listening, Claude Code, like Cowork and Code, they're basically agents of agents. It's it's a fully agentic environment. You tell it what to do, and then it just kind of autonomously does all these things and asks you for permission from time to time if you want to give it permission from time to time. And by the way, I suggest everybody does. You don't want to let this thing go free and forever. Like, that's asking for trouble, especially if you're inside a company. But I like the fact that you certainly can tell it what you need it to do, and you need to be able to tell it what you need it to do, right? Not rely on. You have to be able to have that insight or the wisdom and the knowledge up front to be able to instruct it properly, to give it the full benefit of what you want it to do, and then you set it go. But then you need to manage it. You need to be the supervisor, ducking in every now and then, checking it out. And then at the end, you have to show your discernment, which is the big popular word now, but you have to show your judgment, your discernment to say, yes, this is good, this is not good, and why. So it's not like it's a light load. I mean, it brings different kind of work to you. But what I liked about it, what I really like about it is how deep you can go with the research. Now, this is what I want to get. There's a question here somewhere. So when deep research first came out, people might have said, "Oh, you can do that on deep research. Like, you could do your podcast report on deep research. Just have deep research go out and research all these things." Short answer to that is no, you can't. But
right.
But I noticed, like, quick, and actually even now, sometimes when you run deep research on Google, for example, you have to be really prescriptive in your prompting, because the risks of hallucination are nuts, But Claude, Cowork especially, and maybe Gemini has upgraded since then, but Cowork especially runs these validation agents after it does the thing. So, like, it's fact checking itself, and you still need to fact check again. But how much of this did you use deep research for, if at all? Did you, you don't need to go into how you actually built it. I want you to kind of share your industry secrets, but what did you find to be the most useful things?
That's a really good question. I honestly, I think the only time we really used deep research was in forming the thesis. So very early stage, kind of saying, how would you set up this research plan? Deep research is great at that, right? Of, being able to say, okay, I have this amount of time and I want to answer this big question, and we will do that by, and that's where you start talking, and that was where we started to frame out, like, okay, how many podcasts is going to be enough to really, for our category, and we're looking at, again, it was called, the tech podcast opportunity for privately held companies. So you don't need to listen to, I don't need every podcast in the world. I didn't need to, it doesn't matter what they're talking about on Call Her Daddy. Like, I don't need that. So, I used deep research to help me sort of figure out, just kind of quantify the universe that we were going to have to look at, and then how we were going to go about, ingesting all of that. So that was really where deep research ended. And then it just became kind of a natural back and forth with Cowork, where then, we're coming out of it saying we really want to canvas 96 podcasts. How are we going to ingest those? How are we going to, what are we going to go in and spot as far as patterns? So we started looking at things like, how often, which ones do they have a guest? And if they do have a guest, how often is that guest an investor or a founder or an advisor? And that's where you started to, so I think deep research was helpful in sort of figuring out what trees are we looking for and in that forest, and how are we going to find these patterns. But then it really came down to just this kind of natural back and forth of, here's where I need to get to. And then thankfully Cowork had shipped, I think about a month before that, and was very good at helping, again, like, reallocate the sub agents, and just, I think, very good at getting a lot of unstructured data in and kind of helping to make sure it was all washed and putting together a good taxonomy for it. So then we could spot those patterns really efficiently. And then it kind of let us down when it came time to do the report, really helped surface, okay, well, here's some really interesting things that I hadn't even thought about of, it turns out there's this very kind of small class within that class of 96 shows that were like really, really devoted to privately held tech. So it ended up being only about 12% of that universe of 96 shows were the types of shows that we would definitely, pitch most of our clients to. But that was really valuable, right? Like knowing that 12% put us, way out in front of being able to pitch a podcast.
It's, it just makes me think about the process here, like taking AI out of the question for a moment, just to think of, hey, I want to figure out a way to serve my clients better and figure out where to pitch them better. Where do they belong? Like, how can I not waste their time on earned media and really figure out, like, really nail it in for them? And at the same time, convince them that it's not about the audience size, or it's not about the readership. It's not about the flagship banner or marquee that's across the top. It's about what the quality of the content is, right? About the quality of the audience. Are these your people?
Yeah.
And I mean, as a communicator and a marketer, like I think it's brilliant, and kudos to you for figuring this out. That said, though, coming up with the question, like, how was it? You sitting in a room with your colleagues, with your team? Was it just like, you know what I've noticed? I've noticed something. Were you Seinfeldian about it? Like, did you ever notice? Or was it like, I wonder if I could? How did this happen? Like that you decided, and it's the podcasting, but it's also the other reports you've done. They're really innovative.
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, the first one started with, I remember we were in New York, and this is when twice a year we do the all US agency meeting where we fly everyone into one city. And I think, we were going back and forth about, and I think several times during those meetings that had come up of, one thing all the clients universally wanted was, they want to be in tier one more, right? They want more at bats at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the big names, right? And every PR practitioner will tell you, like, well, there's a lot of value in these less sexy, industry verticals, trades, podcasts, right? You're seeing so many, I think, really, really, and independent journalists, right? People that are starting Substacks and Beehive newsletters, and like, you've got some veterans that have been in the industry a long time and covering that space, and they're an authority on it and are doing their own thing and moving over. And so, a lot of it started as the challenge of, well, how do we actually quantify, this opportunity? How many, in this case, how many privately held CEOs are actually interviewed by the Times and the Journal and the Post in a given quarter? Because, we have a whole client base that would love to assume it's every day. And as, PR folks, we're reading it every day, and we know that's not the case, but we need some data here. And so that was really how the first one started was, well, now we finally had, like, the challenge is you can't read everything all the time, but what if you could? And now that you have AI, you can, right? Like, we can, we can analyze all these things at a scale that doesn't exist even inside, a very, very big agency like an Edelman, where you can not only make sure you're reading every single business section story that runs that quarter, but reading it with the same eyes and entering all the tangibles into a database so that, you end up with this really great audit. And so once we did that, that just led to a lot of other questions of like, okay, well, now what if we do it for, broadcast? Because of course the next thing is, like, everyone wants to be on broadcast. So then you started looking at, what are the patterns in broadcast and what are kind of the unique rhythms of, everyone just sort of kind of waves a hand and says we should be on CNBC, but that's a whole, there's a whole market day of CNBC shows, and they all have different producers. They all have different, kind of aims. A good guest on Closing Bell is not necessarily going to be a good guest for Tech Check. So, and you wanted to kind of strip away the errata of, well, if you only see CNBC when it happens to be on and you're not on a call, and you can really give it your full attention, like that's not going to leave you a really good sample size. So then it became, well, what what can we invent to watch CNBC for us at scale and give us, really great intel into the patterns. And while we're at it, what about Fox Business and what about Bloomberg? So, it's these kind of questions of like, well, what if we could do this? And, AI's taking down a lot of those barriers of, well, you probably can. Now you just need to think about it in the right way. And honestly, I think a lot of it was, talking as a group about what do we do next after the first one. But then a lot of it sort of, I think I can do that. Let me bounce some things. And this is where I compare Claude to, it's less Top Gun. It's actually more Clerks. Like two guys just kind of sitting at a counter and just, you're just sort of like going back and forth.
Bob, who are you?
Yeah. Dante and Randall are just sitting in that video store. They're just kind of talking back and forth about, the ethics of destroying the second Death Star and were there tradespeople on that, in that battle station. And it's that, I think the rhythm tends to feel more like that, where you're just sort of, hey, here's an idea I have. Is this something? And this is where I like Claude versus, ChatGPT, I think is too much of a sycophant to actually get a good answer out of it. But, that's where Claude's like, well, you could probably find this by researching that. Or, if we can have access to this, either, if we can quantify this data or find it, out there in the world, then you can start answering that question for yourself. Or at least we can get a little bit further down the rabbit hole and see if it's even the right question.
Yeah. It's dawning on me, or it's not dawning on me, but I the thread that happens in all these conversations and a lot of these conversations that I have, and certainly in my work, is just like, it takes a really curious person and people to get the ball rolling on this stuff. Like, AI can do all these things. And you're not going to find bigger fans of AI than me and most of my guests. But we have to recognize that there's some things that we should be doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on as professionals, but more, I'd say more experienced professionals or creative and curious people. Combined with that, that, all right, we have these great ideas. We have these clients. We have these customers. I have whatever the target is, I can think of 100 different dots to connect to get to them. And I got to figure out, okay, which ones are the actually viable ones. But really, like, what they are, they're questions. They're like, okay, what does this client want? What does this audience need? What do they want? Like, what do they want from us? How can we achieve this? And you have to just go through this litany of questions that sort of start to come naturally. I think before you even sit down with with your buddy Claude, and then when that's the case, then like Claude really becomes like extremely powerful, right? Because you know what you're doing from day one. Like, I spoke with a couple of friends of mine recently on a show, Brian Piper and Matt Wilkinson, and we were talking about the human in the loop sandwich. There's all these different ways of talking about human in the loop, but Brian put it together as like, he just calls it the sandwich, right? You have to have like this very solid, top and bottom, which for the vast majority of us means bread, but it's it's just going to like be solid. And then that magical meat in between is what gives you the flavor and the actual what the sandwich is. You don't call a sandwich a bread sandwich. You call it a chicken salad sandwich. But if we're the top and the bottom, right? We start it, we set the foundation, then we come in at the end, right? You still have to have enough real direction and trust and knowledge to allow the AI to do what it does before you even come back at the end, So it takes a lot of understanding in the first place, a lot of curiosity and everything. So where you've gone with this, so you have you did the podcast, you just, the question you asked was, what do tech founders need? Like, how could we get
Right,
tech founders on more podcasts?
But yeah, like what is the opportunity for tech founders in podcast?
Yeah.
Because and I think we all see, like, there are a zillion podcasts out there. They're not all going to be valuable. They're not all going to find the right audience,
Mhm.
but the ones that do, have this great connection with their audience. I think that's more like a good friend. And they have this really long tail, right? That content's out there
Yeah.
forever, and especially now with with GEO, I think it's even getting more discoverable.
Mhm.
You can really quickly tell the difference between the serious podcaster that is, packaging the content with neat little chapter breaks and good titles, and they aren't, overly cute about their episode titles. They're not too reliant on like inside jokes, because that content's going to be findable in
Yeah.
5-10 years.
Now.
So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that really started with that question, but I think it's a good point you make about curiosity, because I don't know about you, but I think, in almost 25 years of doing this, I feel like the one thing again and again I've come back to is, the most important thing for a successful PR person is curiosity. Like really being genuinely interested in uncovering what's special about what your clients do and their business and their industry. And I think, time and again, the people that I've worked with that enjoy this the most and are the best at it are the most curious. And it's kind of funny because there's never really been a good metric for curiosity, and
Yeah.
now we have it, right? Like, I mean, I think, and from now on, I think whenever I interview someone, I'm going to say, well, how many GitHub commits or how many, how many Netlify pushes have you done in the last couple of weeks? Because that's like, but really, you know what I mean? There's no barrier now. Like if you're curious about, wouldn't it be cool if you can make that?
Tell me how many handover documents are currently living on your hard drive, right? Tell me how many concurrent sessions of code or Cowork or, how many are going on at any one given time on your PC, on your computer? Like these are great. You're right. They're great quantifiable questions. There's a difference between, realistic curiosity and lunacy. And I feel like I tend more towards the lunacy side sometimes, but it's really all in the pursuit of something that I just don't want to let go. And, back in the day, they might have said, just stop with the questions, man. You're annoying me. But now it's like, keep the questions going, because that's the only way that you're going to get to where you need to go, which is beyond what anybody else can do, or beyond what your competitors are doing, or maybe you're treading in a similar territory, or you're swimming in the same waters, but nobody's going to ask the same questions that you do. Like ultimately, like where it goes, you might start with the same question, but you're not going to end in the same question. So there's a kind of interesting built-in variance, I think, or built-in kind of, way to decommoditize the process. How did you it's not just a podcast one with you guys though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the independent journalist. Can you tell us a little bit about that one? That's fascinating too.
Yeah. And that was another one where, you can see this trend emerging of, it was like Casey Newton, quit to go do his own thing, and Kara Swisher is starting her own thing. Like, you just like kind of all around the same time, there was just we were just seeing more and more of these big name journalists that were leaving behind a big masthead and bringing a really dedicated audience with them, to go start a Substack or go start something on Beehive, or and sometimes they were coupling it with a podcast. They were experimenting with a lot of different subscription models, and it was really interesting because and we sat down and kind of say, okay, well, obviously there are a lot of these out there now, and I think, because it's something new in media, obviously we're curious about it, but also like, I think rightfully so, a lot of clients are going to be skeptical if you say, hey, I think you should do this interview with this journalist. No, you've never heard of this publication before. In fact, it's a Substack newsletter, and he's only got 200 paid subscribers, but this is going to be worth your time. Like that's you need more hard evidence to quantify why it's going to be worth an executive's time to talk to these people. But so that really started us down the path of, okay, well, let's make sure we're reading as many of these things as we can, and then let's do it at scale. So, and that was, let's take a look at a defined universe of, kind of up and coming, these kind of indie platforms. So we looked across Beehive, Ghost, and Substack, and really looking at, well, who's covering, just from like the B2B tech lens, like let's break off that little piece of the universe and see. And so we started with 32 journalists, and kind of the one thing they all had in common was they had all left traditional outlets and were writing, for themselves. And I know our mutual friend Pete Patchell was doing this Media Copilot, and so and conveniently, right before we went to press, kind of with the report, Barry Weiss had left left New York Times, started her own thing, and then left that for CBS. So it was like very clearly kind of proving our thesis of, these things are not, it's not the minor leagues. Like this is basically a new kind of empowered voice in journalism that is kind of using today's tools to build their audience and prove that their audience was portable, and was more interested in them than, the masthead they wrote for. And I think it was great. Actually, our one of our co-founders surfaced this awesome Brian Eno quote. Said the first Velvet Underground album only sold 10,000 copies, but those 10,000 people all formed a band. And that's kind of like what we're seeing. It's the audiences for these like Substacks and Beehive and Ghost. The readership is very influential themselves, and so you have a lot of writers reading other writers' work, and so it has this kind of we're sort of at this inflection point where a lot of them are kind of just starting on this, or they're experimenting with making it their full-time thing. And so there's a really unique opportunity, I think, for brands and marketers that are taking this seriously and want to work with these people in a way that we can help them spread the word and help them grow this audience, and they can do things like you can pay for their flight to come to your client's developer summit, or there's just some things that they couldn't do in traditional journalism that I think that have honestly sort of have kind of outgrown their purpose. And I think you can do it in a way that isn't, that is entirely, above board and has integrity.
Oh yeah.
But you can work with them to really support kind of where they're going and how they're evolving.
Yep.
I think also it's interesting to see, like, while we were doing the report, Substack launched, Substack Defender, which, is sort of a way to support investigative journalism and so that way folks that maybe couldn't fully report a story at the Washington Post can go independent and pick up that same reporting thread and understand that, hey, by the way, there is a program here to look out for me if I do in fact, get sued for libel. So it's a really interesting kind of new channel for emerging voices. And I think, it behooves people like me and folks on the agency side and in-house marketing teams to think about, you got to think of these things fourth dimensionally. So like who's going to be a really important journalist to know 2 years from now, and what can you do now as a brand to, make sure that they know about you and have access to you as they're, climbing up that kind of legitimacy tower.
It's all in line with the change in media relations, isn't it? Like, I've been on the record of saying media relations is dead at time, or is dying, and we need to let it go. That kicked over a few hornets' nests. I qualify that all the time by saying, no, but we need media relations. It's just like, in its current form, what most people think of as media relations is not really going to help much. You're being told to, just like you said earlier, you're being tasked to pick up a tier 1 coverage. Could be a line, it could be anything. That's going to, if you're lucky, you'll get something. But for the most part, even if you are lucky, that something is going to disappear, and forgive me for saying this, when one of my friends said this to me this morning, I can't get out of my head, like a fart in the wind, right? It's just gone. And, who wants that for their media relations program? Yeah, you could say, oh, look, we got you in the New York Times. Yeah, but it was one line somewhere and nobody's going to ever read it or it's like paragraph 19. The Substack and podcasts and, independent journalists and independent writers and people like you and people like me. I have a Substack and, I've been a little lax with it lately. I will give you that. But it's been very well received, like crazy well received. That I'm not talking about massive numbers. If people come, they come. But I get incredible comments, and not just flattery, not flattery. I mean, like constructive industry, thinking about the industry, thinking about where we're going, insightful responses, because the readers of Substack do tend to be like authors and readers and writers themselves. They're all thinking about this stuff, and then it gives me more content that I can just repurpose across LinkedIn or whatever. And, but I'm no journalist. I write every now and then. I'm not a journalist. I have my podcast here, and this is the source of so much incredible content. And, I get pitched all the time, and I'm glad I get pitched all the time. 99% of the pitches are off. They're not right because they're mostly, automations or AI driven. But every once in a while, I bring on a guest who I got from a pitch, and I never have regretted it. And I'm getting pitched. I mean, it's crazy. Like I'm in this podcast world. Who am I? But you think about it, and that is what media relations is now. Like it's getting into the micro channels where your listeners and where your readers and where the people who make decisions are. And you have to figure out that that's where somebody's got to go, oh yeah, that means I shouldn't waste so much money on pitching the Times. I should maybe take a fraction of that and spend my time calling up a couple of podcasters who are like right in the zone, or, and not only will you get incredible coverage because, you're talking for a half hour, an hour, that's a lot of words, you get the assets. It's a no-brainer to me as a communicator and a marketer. And I'm thinking, like, why aren't more people getting on the boat? So where do you see the future of media relations in this sense? Like, where is it going?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't necessarily subscribe to media relations as dead, but I think it does. It's very like it kind of goes into a chrysalis and emerges as a beautiful butterfly every couple of years. And we keep going through these cycles where, and I think if you look at what media relations is now versus what it looked like when I started my career, like those don't even like, that's not even the same behaviors, right? No. I mean, in 2003, it was like, okay, well, let me go over to the big shelf with all the Bacon's books and just crack those open and, start putting a list together of all the reporters I want to, call. And if it's a media alert going out, I'll make sure to send them all a fax that day with the satellite coordinates, right? Like none of these happen anymore. So
no,
it's changed, and that's good. Like and it will continue to change because, the way we consume media and the way media monetizes keeps changing as well. So, I mean, what stayed the same is, it's still a lot of relationships. I think, good PR people still have, great relationships with producers and reporters and people that, are working at, yes, these, big publications that everyone loves, but also that you're taking the time to, rather than just pitching someone Substack, like, well, read a few months of their work, like actually read it, not just make your AI analyze it. And actually, cause right. Why pitch it if you haven't read their work and you don't know that it's going to be a perfect fit? But yeah, you're right. I think it has changed a lot in that, even if you do get, let's say you get the that New York Times or that Wall Street Journal or that Fox Business hit that everyone's after. That's great, but it's got to be part of a larger, that should be the beginning of a larger thing of, okay, now that our CEO has spoken about this thing on Fox Business, well, first of all, what's he doing when Fox Business posts it on YouTube or the producer posts it on their Twitter, sorry, X, are they in the comments continuing that conversation? And then are they also going to unpack that on a podcast the next week? Are they writing about it in their own words to put on the blog or on the company's LinkedIn page? There's just a lot more places to sweat the content now. And that's great. It makes media relations matter so much more. And then I think, let's not ignore, like, GEO has been, I think, a huge shot in the arm for earned media relations, trusted brands. And, I think it's going to do a lot to lift up those kind of really specific industry verticals and those kind of niche publications that really go a mile deep, on their content. Like that's GEO solid gold, because AI search is going to find that again and again, and it's going to find it today, and it's going to find it 5 years from now. So yeah, I mean, I think and what a good time to be a younger person starting your career in PR with all these tools for earned media discovery, and like just making the media relations process so much sharper and more effective. I wonder how much time I spent, poring over a media list in Excel and calling all the reporters just to find out we had the wrong phone number. Like, it's evolved.
But there was a lot of there's a good rationale for going through the crap that people had to go through to get to where you are now, because you gain wisdom even if you're spinning wheels a lot of the time, because you start to figure out, what's good and what's bad, or what works and what doesn't work, and you do that through almost kinetically, like it gets to be a muscle memory. And nowadays, like the people who are entering the profession, or even people who've been in it and just are, they're outsourcing their thinking, or they're doing the old cognitive offload thing, to throw a little term out there. There's a lot of muscle memory that's being lost, but I don't know if that's a bad thing, right? I don't. Only time will tell, because where's this going to end up? We don't know. I agree with you though, like certainly about the GEO part of this. And right now, you have the different platforms, the frontier LLMs have whatever deals they have with different publishers, and they're working with different search parameters, and like I just learned recently that like ChatGPT search is essentially an 80 to 90% overlap with Google, right? So, but Claude is using Brave browser, right? So Claude and Claude search is very different, like almost zero overlap, at least in the top 10 returns or whatever, than ChatGPT, right? So where do the engines, where are they searching is a big thing. Then what relationships do they have with publishers? Is the Wall Street Journal open to them or not? All these questions will change the calculus. But going deep content, rich content, like useful exposés and articles and thought pieces on your Substacks, on blogs, but in the trades, all these places that aren't so beholden to a corporate master necessarily, or to page views. That's where the future is, right? And that's where and podcasts and stuff, and that's where AI is looking more and more. But there's sort of one critical factor that all those channels, all those publishers need, podcasters included. And that one little critical factor is authority, right? So and I'm a little self-interested here because that's what LilyPath, my company, is about. Is like, we're trying to figure out the whole authority thing. We're making sure people stay visible and and that what AI says about them is accurate, right? But that's just the beginning of an attempt or of a way to quantify what authority really is for an individual. We're not looking at websites, right? So website authority has been, Google's been doing that for ages. And, or if you're a brand, then your homepage, your URL, it's got authority. But what if you're Rich Gallagher? You're authoritative. We talked about everything we've talked about so far on the podcast today proves that you are an authoritative individual, but AI doesn't know Rich Gallagher in Princeton from Rich Gallagher someplace else. Mm-hmm. So now hopefully the transcript of this podcast goes into the wherever it goes, it's certainly going to be searchable, and AI will pick up on it, and it'll be another notch in your authority, right? So when we look at the Substacks, when we look at the podcasts, they're all tied to a person, they're all tied to like an individual's authority now. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole different world for media relations, especially. Like, is there going to be a number that you're going to say, well, their authority is like 60 out of 100. I don't know if it's worth the pitch. I don't know. It could happen. Could happen. Geez, we're hitting the hour, Rich. Last thing, I'll just say that I could continue forever and forever, and I know that my listeners know this on these AI topics, but any last words for our listeners, Rich? Anything you want to say to folks before we wrap? I mean, maybe you could think about what's keeping you up at night, or what do you look forward to? Something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think now I don't know about you, but I feel guilty going to bed without giving Claude something to work on. Right? Like, so I know, like, we've been doing, we've got a really cool app now where we're tracking, it's expectedclichétracker.com.
Oh.
And we're looking at, you getting the plug in there, the managers in the big soccer tournament. Mm-hmm. We're not a FIFA partner. But, looking at how often are they using cliches in their pre and post game press conferences. And that's become something where, with the time most of these games happen, and then when the post-match press conferences happen, we've got that, we've automated pulling in the press conference transcript and then scoring that for severity based on how trite the cliches are. And that's, I think that opens up just these endless other ideas of like, wow, what else could we be, what other kind of patter is out there that, like, where are people wasting words on just sort of, saying a good cliche or a trite thing. And that's, I think that, is going to open up a whole, like, it's got me thinking a lot about, how are these big, this is like hot IPO summer. How are they communicating it? What is that? Mm-hmm. What does that sound like? What channels are they kind of, where are they getting the word out? What podcasts are they going on to talk about it? Like, and how is all of this entering the calculus into the valuation? I think could be a really interesting thing to look at.
Wow. I just thought of like crisis response, and, think about what is a post-game press conference for the loser, if not a crisis response situation, right? That's what it is.
Yes.
Right.
Very good. Good point.
So like you got the losing team, you got their spokesperson, their coach going up there. They're often highly, highly media trained, right? They all, in fact, they all are. And how many of them are just sticking to cliche talking points when they've lost versus how many are sticking to cliches when they win? That's something I'd love to see out of your. That's what you're doing, but it's in there.
I will definitely send that your way because it's interesting. We're finding, just looking at in the confines of a single match, we're looking at the delta between the pre-match and post-match conference. The losers are almost always throwing out way more cliches, and the winners come to the podium so much more kind of clear-eyed. And there was one exception in the early games, and it was Tunisia, and they lost a lot. They lost by, I think, 4 goals, and the coach came up and very few cliches, just very much by the book of this is why we lost, and it was terrible, and this is who we should, and blame me. And he got sacked. He lost his job after that press conference. So using cliches when you've lost a game is kind of a job protection device.
It could be.
Turns out.
Well, look at any corporate apology for the last however long there have been corporations.
You mean, I'm sorry you feel that way?
It's crazy. But this is a great study. And see, this is the kind of stuff that happens when you have like somebody like, hey, I wonder what happens if we measure this. And, I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more of that from you, Rich, and from your people and from your team at Brands to Life. So everybody out there, you can find Rich, of course, on LinkedIn, Rich Gallagher. There's a lot of Rich Gallaghers, clearly, but look for the guy in Princeton. He's the right one. Yep. Something about it, look for an innovation AI guy in Princeton, and that's Rich Gallagher. You can find him on, of course, at his company, brands2life.com. He's the head of innovation. What's the exact title? Head of Comms Innovation?
Head of Comms Innovation. Yep.
Right. Head of Comms Innovation at Brands2Life. That's brands with a number 2life.com. And then PrincetonNarrativeLab.com, all spelled out. Princeton Narrative Lab is Rich's independent website. And you can just find him all of those places. I prefer to find him at a networking event locally, have a couple beers, but Rich, it's been a real pleasure. I know that we're going to need to continue the conversation, but thank you very much. Come back again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And hope to see you out there in the wild soon. We can keep talking.
Guaranteed. See ya.
Thanks a lot, Dan.